Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the session that the Research Compliance Committee is hosting. So to begin, I'm just going to give a couple of Zoom reminders. Go to the next slide, please. So if you experience any Zoom technical issues, please call 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. Your audio will be connected through your computer or through a call-in number. If you experience any troubles with your audio, please message me in the chat box and we can call you in. Submit questions at any time in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And you please turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you are called upon to ask your question. And if you are unmuting yourself, remember to mute and turn off your camera once you are done speaking. All of the Zoom recording slides and session summaries we posted on our website at thefdp.org after the meeting. So now I'm going to pass it off to Melissa Korth.
Good morning, everyone. I think for everyone, including those of us on the East Coast, it is still morning. Thank you for joining us for this first session of the third day of the May virtual FDP meeting. Just to give a little overview of how today's session is going to run. We think maybe the first 45 minutes, an hour, we'll hear about some efforts to reduce the burden associated with animal research from our colleagues in OLA and USDA-APHIS. And then we'll transition over for the last section of the session to some other research compliance subcommittee updates. So I am pleased to be able to hand off the start of our session to Neera Gopi, Associate Director, Animal Welfare Policy within OLA at the NIH, and Lance Bassage, Director of National Policy Staff at USDA-APHIS. Thanks so much, Neera and Lance, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Melissa, and hello, everyone. Dr. Bassage and I are really happy to be here, and we would like to thank FDP and the Research Compliance Committee for the opportunity to speak to you today about our agency's efforts to reduce administrative burden as part of the 21st Century Cures Act. We would also like to give a shout out to all of those who participated in the thought exchange and provided ideas on our current and ongoing efforts to reduce burden on investigators. Next slide, please, Melissa. So the information we would like to share with you today includes a brief discussion on the 21st Century Cures Act history. We'll then describe both USDA and OLA's regulatory and policy updates under the 21st Century Cures Act. And then we'll identify some opportunities for commenting on proposed guidance. Next slide, please. So I'll start with describing a little bit about the 21st Century Cures Act for those of you who may not be familiar with it. It is a bipartisan legislation that was passed in December of 2016 with the overall intent to advance biomedical research from basic research to advanced clinical trials, as well as to streamline drug and device approval processes to bring treatments to patients faster. It is a multi-section law, and for our interest today, Section 2034 of the law mandates federal efforts to reduce administrative burden for researchers. Specifically, Part D of Section 2034 assigns the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, as the lead agency in cooperation with USDA and FDA to focus on animal care and use in research. Next slide, please. So it identifies the following specific activities expected by Congress. One, to identify inconsistent, overlapping, and unnecessarily duplicative regulations and policies. To take steps to reduce identified regulations and policies. And 3, to take actions as appropriate to improve coordination of regulations and policies. Section 2034D specifically requires not later than 2 years after the law was enacted that the NIH, in collaboration with USDA and FDA, to review, as applicable, regulations and policies for the care and use of laboratory animals and make revisions as appropriate to reduce administrative burden on investigators while maintaining the integrity and credibility of research findings and protection of research animals. Next slide. So following the passage of the law in 2016, the NIH convened a working group in February of 2017, and they began their efforts by reviewing regulations, relevant regulations and policies. In addition, the working group reviewed documents and surveys that included the 2017 FASEB report, FASEB and COGA report, as well as the 2012 FDP Faculty Workload Survey Research Report. In 2018, the agencies held listening sessions and asked public to provide their ideas on how to meet the requirements of the law. A request for information, or RFI, was released for public comment on proposed actions to improve the coordination and harmonization of regulations and policies. And based on the input from the public, a draft report was issued in December of 2018. A final report based on the public comments was then released in August of 2019. Following the final report in 2019, OLO NIH has actually published a total of 6 RFIs, 6 requests for information, and 5 guide notices. USDA also issued a proposed rule, as well as they published a final rule in the Federal Register. And also, since the inception of the final report in 2019, OLO and USDA have began efforts to improve coordination with the Department of Defense, DoD, the Veterans Affairs, VA, National Science Foundation, NSF, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Next slide, please. So I do encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, to review the final report, Reducing Administrative Burden for Researchers, Animal Care and Use in Research. It can be found at the URL listed on the slide, and it describes the recommendations and decisions of the agencies. And I'd like to call special attention to Appendix 3 of this report, which summarizes the responses to the draft report with the working group analysis and agency decisions. And with that, I'll hand it over to my USDA colleague, Dr. Basaj.
Thanks, Dr. Gopi. And good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. And I'd like to spend just a few minutes outlining some recent regulatory changes on the USDA side in response to the 21st Century Cures Act mandate that Dr. Gopi just covered. Next slide, please. So as most of you are probably aware, or hopefully you're aware, we published a final rule in the Federal Register in December of this past year that implemented modifications to our regulations affecting research facilities with the goal of reducing administrative burden. Next slide. And we won't cover all of this in detail because Dr. Gopi just went through it, but obviously these changes were in response to the 21st Century Cures Act, with the goal, of course, to reduce administrative burden on the research community while maintaining integrity of the research and protection of the animals. These changes affect approximately 1,100 registered research facilities that utilize animals. Next slide, please. So the first of these regulatory changes involve the registration process. We removed the requirement to update a registration every 3 years. Facilities will no longer have to request inactive status. So you don't have to update your registration every 3 years, and you no longer have to request inactive status. Facilities will either, going forward, be registered or unregistered. These changes are beneficial to both the facility and the USDA. The facilities don't have to remember to submit paperwork. In addition, this saves the taxpayers significant amount of money, as our veterinary medical officers do not have to repeatedly drive out to facilities only to discover that the facility is inactive. Next slide, please. And the next change involves the frequency of reviews of animal activities. Instead of the previous requirement to perform continuous reviews not less than annually, the IACUC now must complete a review of all animal activities every 3 years. And of course, this harmonizes our regulations with the Public Health Service policy. Next slide. And then finally, we no longer require that the CEO or the institutional official or an institutional official physically signs the annual reports, which certainly expedites processing. It also, theoretically prevents signature theft. Next slide. And last but not least, I just will remind you of how to contact us should you need any assistance in any way, and a quick reminder about our webpage that provides guidance and assistance with submitting annual reports. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Gopi.
Thank you. So I'll now shift gears and describe all of OLOR's efforts thus far in reducing burden as part of the 21st Century Cures Act. Next slide. So OLOR has a dedicated 21st Century Cures Act webpage, and it can be accessed by clicking on the blue banner on OLOR's homepage. And the 21st Century Cures Act landing page has both completed and ongoing action items. So please familiarize yourself with this webpage, and it has a wealth of information that may be helpful to your institution. Next slide. So I'll first start with some of our published guidance. Next slide, please. So OLOR provides a minimum of 60 days for comments to significant policy guidance, which may include, but is not limited to, any new interpretations of the PHS policy, the guide, and the AVMA guidelines for the euthanasia of animals. We have been, in fact, providing 90-day comment period as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And such guidance will focus on high-risk animal welfare concerns affecting institutions and IACUC functions. Next slide, please. On May 21st, 2020, OLOR released a notice of update to the reporting period of the annual report to OLOR. And this notice informed assured institutions that the reporting period for the annual report to OLOR harmonizes with the reporting period of the USDA's annual report by aligning to the federal fiscal year instead of the calendar year. And this extends from October 1st to September 30th of each year. And reports are due to OLOR no later by December 1st. And this will actually be our 3rd year of implementation of this guidance. Next slide. On June 4th, 2021, OLOR released a guide notice encouraging ALAC International accredited institutions to use sections of the ALAC International Program description in applicable parts of their animal welfare assurance. The relevant sections of the ALAC program description that institutions may incorporate into their assurance include those sections involving post-approval monitoring, occupational health and safety of personnel, training, education, and continuing educational opportunities, and the role of the IACUC. Please note that institutions must ensure that all information requested in the assurance document is provided, including information not requested in the ALAC program description, but is required by OLOR. Next slide, please. So OLOR, in coordination with our USDA colleagues, released final guidance on August 2nd, 2021, describing 9 flexibilities for conducting semi-annual facility inspections. Next slide. And both Dr. Basaj and I will now discuss the similarities and differences of each agencies when conducting the semi-annual facility inspections. Both agencies do require that no IACUC members who would like to be involved in the inspections should be involuntarily excluded from those inspections. And there's also a requirement that the IACUC remains responsible for the evaluation and the semi-annual report to the IO. So who should conduct the semi-annual inspections? As from a PHS perspective, as few as one qualified individual or ad hoc consultant who need not be an IACUC member or an institutional employee may be involved and may conduct the semi-annual inspections. And Dr. Basaj, you need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Thank you very much. That's the first step in reducing burden is unmuting. For areas housing USDA regulated species, a subcommittee of at least 2 IACUC members are required, and the use of an ad hoc consultant is allowed. IACUC members involved in these inspections are not required to inspect together and may each inspect different parts of the facility. When should the inspections occur? Both agencies agree that the timing of facility inspections can include flexibility of within 30 calendar days of the 6-month interval from the last inspection, provided that there is no forward drift of the date from year to year. To avoid forward drift, the IACUC should consider scheduling facility inspections during the same calendar month from year to year. By having this 30-day flexibility, it allows extra time for IACUCs without changing the current or future dates of subsequent inspections. Dr. Gopi?
So where should the inspections be conducted? So all animal facilities as defined by the PHS policy must be inspected semi-annually. And this includes satellite facilities and surgical areas. But the IACUC has discretion to determine how frequently to inspect other areas such as routine weighing, dosing, immunization, or imaging areas. But these areas must be or should be monitored regularly. And Dr. Basaj?
Animal facilities, as defined in the animal welfare regulations, including animal study areas, must be inspected semi-annually, but exclude free living wild animals in their natural habitat.
Next slide.
Next slide.
So we both agree that remote options are available. IACUCs may use videos, photographs, written description, or other appropriate remote methods to inspect facilities housing non-Animal Welfare Act regulated species. But for the USDA, Dr. Basaj?
Right, so for areas housing Animal Welfare Act regulated species, only live feed is allowed for inspections using video. And it's important to note that now that the acute pandemic conditions are no longer affecting our inspection process, the only inspections we allow by virtual live feed at this point are situations in which a registrant has made a credible threat to the safety of the inspector. Dr. Gopi?
Okay, so IACUCs may assign specific facility inspections to subcommittees, being cognizant of avoiding biased evaluations. They may perform facility inspections on a staggered schedule where all facilities are inspected over time, provided that each area is inspected at least once every 6 months. IACUCs may choose to have inspections be announced or unannounced, and they may choose to use the OLOR checklist, which is quite handy and can be customized to your institutional animal care and use program. But please keep in mind, this is something that might be worthwhile looking into when conducting your semi-annual inspections. Next slide. And last but not least, institutions may use the ALAC site visit as part of their semi-annual inspection, provided it meets the requirements of the PHS policy and Animal Welfare Act regulations for the report contents, and the subsequent inspection is conducted no later than 6 months from when the site visit occurred. Please note that when using an ALAC site visit, the subsequent report to the IO must comply with PHS policy 4B3 and must be endorsed by the IACUC as an official IACUC report and submitted by the IACUC to the IO.
Thank you. And for institutions covered by the animal welfare regulations, the report must comply with section 2.31C of the regulations. These requirements are that the site visit corresponds with the time the IACUC semi-annual inspection was to be conducted. The program and facility inspection address all of the required areas. At least 2 members of the IACUC assist in conducting the inspection. All members are informed of the evaluation to be conducted by the appointed subcommittee in sufficient time to request participation. No IACUC member wishing to participate in any evaluation may be excluded. Any identified departures from the animal welfare regulations and standards include a description of and reason for the departure. And finally, the report is signed by a majority of the IACUC members. Individual digital signatures are acceptable.
Next slide, please, Melissa. All right. So 2 guidance documents have been developed and published to address subtle differences between grant to protocol congruence review and contract to protocol congruence review. And these guide notices describe the requirements, the responsibility, timing and verification, and methods for conducting congruence review. Next slide. To provide a little bit of a summary of the institutional responsibilities for congruence review, it is the institution's responsibility and not the IACUC's to ensure that the information that the IACUC reviews and approves is consistent with that contained in the application or the contract to be funded. While the IACUC may perform the congruence review, it is not a required IACUC function and may be performed by other qualified institutional personnel, such as sponsored programs or compliance office. Congruence review must be performed prior to initial award. The institution verifies that there is congruence when it provides verification of the IACUC approval date. The contracting officer will notify contractors to provide verification of IACUC approval prior to award. And when it comes to grant applications, it's usually done in accordance with just-in-time procedures. There's no explicit requirement to do a side-by-side comparison of an entire application or contract and the IACUC protocol. Instead, institutions are free to devise a workable mechanism for developing and implementing an appropriate system of policies and procedures to ensure congruence review. And institutions may opt to review multiple sections of the application or the contract, or may focus on a well-written vertebrate animal section within the contract or the application. Next slide. So I'll now move on to some of our published requests for information or RFIs. Next slide, please. So OLO released a request for information on flexibilities to reduce administrative burden while continuing to apply the PHS policy to zebrafish immediately after hatching. This RFI closed on August 9, 2021, and OLO is working on developing guidance based on stakeholder responses. Next slide. We also posted a request for information on clarifying the reporting requirements for departures from the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals. This RFI closed on November 1st, 2021, and OLO sought for information on the guide exceptions list, the must statement checklist, and IACUC reporting requirements for departures from must, should, and may statements. And OLO staff is working on developing final guidance based on the responses received from the RFI. Next slide. So hot off the press on August 19, 2022, just a couple of weeks ago, OLO in collaboration with USDA published a request for information on flexibilities for conducting semi-annual program review. And this was an additional opportunity that we saw to reduce administrative burden, although it was not identified for action in the final report. I implore you to please take advantage of this open period, comment period. It closes on August 1st, 2022. And it describes 7 flexibilities for conducting semi-annual program review, which includes use of teleconferencing or video conferencing for conducting convened ICOC meetings, use of 1 qualified individual or ad hoc consultants for non-Animal Welfare Act regulated species or areas, review of SOPs as to be determined by the IACUC. If it's not a protocol related SOP, it can be reviewed by the IACUC on a regular basis and to be determined at a frequency that's convenient. It includes flexibilities of conducting the program review within 30 calendar days of the 6-month interval from the last program review, It can be performed on a staggered schedule, provided that the entire program is reviewed every 6 months. And it also includes the use of the ALAC site visit as a program review, one of your semi-annual program reviews. So I do encourage you to review this RFI, and please comment before it closes on August 1st, 2022. Next slide. So some outstanding action items for future guidance include the development of RFI in conjunction with USDA, which will seek input on encouraging IACUCs to use existing flexibilities to streamline protocol review and review of significant changes. Existing options include designated member review or DMR, DMR subsequent full committee review, veterinary verification and consultation or VVC, and administrative handling of increases in previously approved animal numbers. Another RFI in development will seek stakeholder input on proposed clarification of animal activities that are exempt from the PHS policy requirements for IACUC review. And OLAW's current prompt reporting guidance is also being updated to clarify the reporting requirements. In conjunction with the FDA, the options for IACUC review of non-pharmaceutical grade substances will also be reviewed and developed. So I do implore you to please stay tuned and be on the lookout for the release of these RFIs in the future. Next slide. Additional steps that NIH has been involved in is to improve coordination and harmonization, include engaging with the DoD, the VA, the National NSF, and NASA about options for harmonizing requirements to reduce administrative burden on investigators who receive support for research with animals from multiple federal agencies. We continue to support the training through the ICARE project, ICAC 101, SCORE, and Primina, and we continue to support the efforts of the FDP in the development and creation of the CUSP repository, as well as the Universal Protocol template. And finally, we continue to focus on updating our website resources to improve IACUC function, enhance IACUC communication with investigators, and recognize pitfalls that increase burden. Next slide. So in summary, our implementation efforts for reducing regulatory burden are ongoing. We do plan to continue to engage with you as our primary stakeholders throughout the process and to evaluate the outcome of the effects of the efforts. We will accomplish this by enlisting an evaluation team to gather input from researchers, ICAC members, and animal care and use program representatives. We have engaged, and we do plan to continue to engage with the FDP and other key representatives from scientific and professional organizations, and will use their leverage with their constituents to develop and distribute surveys. The intent of the surveys will be to gather information on the effectiveness of the agency's actions in reducing administrative burden on researchers and how we can best communicate to encourage institutions to not impose unnecessary burden. Next slide. So please feel free to contact Olo should you have any questions or concerns. We can be reached by phone or email, and our website has a wealth of information. You can also subscribe to our listserv or follow us on Twitter. Next slide. And before we close off, I'd like to mention that you will be receiving there'll be another thought exchange post-session survey question. And this question is identical to what was sent prior to this live session. And we're asking this same question again because we would like to find out whether this live session did have an impact on your, on your knowledge of what efforts we have completed thus far on reducing burden, and whether it has an effect on your perception of the efforts to reduce workload for researchers. So please, we welcome any ideas that you put into that thought exchange, and we do take them seriously. Next slide. And with that, that's it. This concludes our discussion. Next slide. And both Dr. Basaj and I will be happy to answer any questions, and we'll hand it back over to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gopi and Dr. Basaj. That was a really excellent overview of all of your very impressive efforts to reduce administrative burden in this space. Makes our FDP hearts happy to see these efforts. I just wanted to put it out to our community. Any questions, comments, please feel free to either put those in the chat, or if you raise your hand or let us know, we can have you unmute yourself so that you can comment verbally. All right. I think that maybe we'll move on, and if folks, Dr. Gopi and Dr. Basaj, are you going to stay with us through the rest of the session? So as folks take a few minutes to digest, please feel free to pop questions in the chat, or we'll have an opportunity for additional Q&A and discussion when we get to the end of the research compliance updates. So moving on to some other subcommittee updates, and just to give a little bit of an idea of agenda for this section of the session. We'll first have an update from two projects that are really relevant to the efforts to reduce the administrative burden associated with animal research under the 21st Century Cures Act. And so we'll start with an update on the Compliance Unit Standard Procedure, or CUSP, sharing site project, an update on the Universal Protocol Template, or UPT project. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the recent rebranding of the Export Control Subcommittee into a Research Security Subcommittee to broaden that scope to best meet current needs. And have a discussion about other ways that we can keep updated with each other and create a community through the listservs or other topics that come to mind. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Aubrey Schoenleben at the University of Washington to provide the CUSP sharing site update.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I am Aubrey. I'm from the University of Washington and one of the co-chairs of the CUSP project. So my plan for today is to just start with a little bit of background on what the CUSP project is and why we think developing this tool will be beneficial for our community, just to help catch up any new members in the audience. I'll then share with you an update on the current status of the project. I also wanted to touch a little bit on security and just how we're kind of addressing that and kind of building features, security features into the site. That's been a frequently asked question over the past couple of months. So I just wanted to take some time to address that. And then I'll just share with you some of the other work that our steering committee and our working group has been working on since we saw you last in January. Next slide, please. All right, so the goal of the CUS project really is just to create an online venue where institutions can share standard procedures with one another that are used in animal care protocols. And as Mira and Melissa mentioned, this is one of the burden reducing initiatives of the 21st Century Cures Act. Next slide, please. And we think that developing this resource will have a number of benefits for our community. First and foremost, we think that it will reduce administrative burden, not only for researchers, but also for IACUCs and IACUC support staff by decreasing the amount of time it takes to put together a high quality animal care protocol and get it through the review process. We also think that this tool will help to provide consistency not only within a given institution, but also across institutions. And I think that's more important these days as our research environment is becoming increasingly collaborative, I think, with each year. So consistency, excuse me, is certainly key. And then last, it really is a knowledge sharing tool. And so, you know, if I'm looking to build a wheel, for example, and Melissa or Nira have a great plan for a wheel that they're willing to share, there's no reason for me to start my plans from scratch. I can use their plans as is, if that meets my particular needs, or I can use that plan then as a starting point to build a plan that meets my particular research needs. And so the CUSP sharing site will really work in a very similar manner and to help institutions create and build procedure libraries that they can use at their institutions. Next slide, please. All right, so what is the current status of the project? So this is probably a familiar timeline to many of you that are have been following along on this status, but I always like to include it because it gives a really nice sense of where we've been and where we're headed. So we're currently in site development and testing. So last summer, we had completed the build of a beta site in a coding language called Cold Fusion, and it was a really wonderful proof of concept for the CUSP sharing site. At that time, though, we made the decision to transition that beta site over to a more modern technology stack. And that decision was really motivated by two factors. The first was that we really wanted to just make sure the tool that we were developing stayed in alignment with FDP's strategic planning goals for phase 7. And part of that really is just to create integrated systems. And so we just wanted to make sure that the site that we were developing would be able to easily integrate and play well with other databases that the FDP is currently developing, such as their membership database. The second motivation for moving over to a more modern technology stack was really just long-term maintenance. We wanted to make sure that we were developing a tool that we would be able to easily maintain and enhance over time, and by switching to a more modern coding language that helped to support that goal of ours as well. So we were able to identify a developer that could help us make this transition over to the more modern language. And so we're currently in the middle of that transition, which has been fantastic. Last month, we completed a really important milestone. We were able to complete our first round of user acceptance testing in April, which was super exciting and a long time coming, I think, or at least it feels like. So we had 18 testers participate in that round of testing, and they represented 15 different institutions. The institutions that they represented, I thought, brought a really nice range of perspectives to the testing round. They represented programs that were small, large, complex. They had a range of protocol management systems that they use at their home institutions, so paper-based as well as electronic. So it brought a really nice a nice range of perspectives to testing, which was great. The testing went really well. We had about a 50% pass rate for our test cases, which meant that our testers did an awesome job of getting into the system and just kind of poking around and seeing where there are still bugs and kinks that we need to work out. So that was really good to see. So we're currently in the process of going through all of those failed test cases and addressing the issues that were found, and then getting fixes into the system and then retesting those. And so we anticipate that there's probably going to be maybe 2 to 3 more rounds of testing in this phase before we can release the site to a wider audience. Next slide, please. All right, so site security, definitely a hot topic as of late. So it is something that we are taking seriously, and we are incorporating several security features into the design of the site. And so I just wanted to touch on those a little bit for all of you. And so one of the nice things with this transition over to the more modern technology stack was we were able to kind of rethink how new accounts are requested, and kind of refine that process to be more secure. So it is now a 2-step process for requesting site access. So users, when they submit kind of the request access form, the first step then is that they need to verify their email address. So they'll get an email, they have to click on a link that verifies. And so once that email address is verified, then they can affiliate with an institution, and then an institutional representative actually needs to confirm that an account is okay for that user. So that's been a nice adjustment as part of this transition. Additionally, we have multiple user roles within the site, so that not just anybody can add information into the site. So at the most basic level, we have the community member, which is read-only access, and this will really just be the majority of users in the site as we envision it. So they'll be able to search for procedures that are of interest to them and their home institution, open them up, read them. They can download a PDF copy. And then at the next level, we'll have the institutional representative. This is a really critical role within the system. We will require every institution that participates in the site to have at least one individual with this role. And so this role will have basically read and write access. So institutional representatives will be responsible for adding procedures to the site on behalf of their home institution. They'll also be responsible for adding and managing user accounts for their home institution. And then at the last level is just a site administrator. They basically have full access to the site, and this will be limited to just a few individuals within the CUSP steering committee, as well as within FDP, so developers and that sort of thing. Another option that institutions will have is they can choose to either display or not display their institution name on any procedures that are submitted to the site. And this option is available on a procedure by procedure basis. So if there are particular topics or maybe species where there are concerns or sensitivities, institutions will have this as an option to help manage those concerns. Just, I guess, from a more structural, I guess, for lack of a better word, perspective, the database itself is going to be built on a split server environment. I'm not a technical person by any stretch of the imagination, but that basically means that the database side of things is going to be protected behind a firewall. Additionally, users, whenever they log into the system, there is a section in their user profile where they can see all of the active browser sessions that their credentials are being used to log in as. And so if you're logged into your account, you should really only see one, which is the current session that you're logged in as. So if you get in there and you see that there are multiple active browser sessions, that's maybe a good tip that your login credentials have been compromised. So there will be the option to log out of all of those browser sessions, and then you can change your password to something more secure. Future enhancements that we are working on as well is including a two-factor authentication for users whenever they log into their account, as well as implementing a single sign-on provider to help manage account access and passwords. And so this would basically enable users to use their home institution login credentials to access the CUSP site. Next slide, please. All right, so I now wanted to share with you some of the activities that our working group has been working on since we last saw you in January. So our education and outreach team, which is headed up by Michelle Brott from the University of Washington and Scott Berry from Vanderbilt, they're currently working to develop kind of a one-pager for new institutions that are interested in joining CUSP. And this will be kind of just a really high level, what is CUSP, what are the benefits, how do you get involved sort of document. And they're also developing a section of our sharing site that's just kind of more information. This is available or will be accessible, I guess, on the login screen of the CUSP site. So the audience will be not only users that have accounts to log in, but really any member of the public that happens to stop by the site, they'll have access to that section. And so we're really kind of thinking of this as a kind of a what, why supported by sort of little blurb about the project. And then the education outreach team has also been doing a phenomenal job of just sharing our progress at both local and national meetings. So Mark Nath and Meredith Moore were able to present on CUSP at the SRAI meeting back in April, just a couple of weeks ago. And then Sally Thompson-Iritani and I gave the 21st Century Cures Act working group an update on CUSP back in March. And we're also planning to share an update with the community at the ALAS meeting coming up this fall. So our help desk team, which is being led by Elaine Kim from Colorado State and April Ripka from Penn State. Now that we are into that first round of testing, they're really kind of ramping up efforts again to update the help documentation that they have started to develop to reflect the new user interface and the new system that we're developing. And they're also starting to flesh out frequently asked questions for site users. And so we had a little bit of a bank going prior with our beta version of the site, but we're also, we've asked our testers this round as well to help us brainstorm good FAQs. So as they're kind of interacting with the site for the first time, just kind of being cognizant of the questions that bubble up for them so that we can hopefully anticipate some of the questions that new site users may come across and have an answer prepared for them. They're also currently exploring some solutions for help videos to include within the site. So this would both be kind of an end-to-end video that would give you just an overview of the site and all of the features that are available, as well as much shorter kind of task-specific guides. So, how do I edit a procedure, or how do I add a new account, things along those lines. So our quality control team is chaired by Eva McGee from Charles Drew University. And they have been doing some really great work on developing and are really close to finalizing a user survey that we're going to implement. And so the goal of this survey is twofold. First, we are just going to collect data that's needed, or I guess required for reporting requirements related to the funding that we have supporting this project. But we're also going to be collecting just general user feedback from the community, just to get a sense of if we're meeting the community's needs and just where we can refine things as we move forward. So I guess a heads up, executive committee, we'll be sending that to you probably sometime within this month, just to kind of get your eyes on the questions that that we've developed thus far. And then closely related to that goal, they've also been working on an implementation plan. So just identifying a tool that we can use to build that survey itself, and then just figuring out kind of when do we survey folks, how frequently do we survey folks, those sorts of questions. And then last but certainly not least, we have our technical systems team, which is chaired by Mark Nath from Providence and Cindy Rosenblatt from Medical University of South Carolina. And they have really ramped up over the last couple of months. They've been huge in supporting the testing process, not only by participating in testing itself, but also with a lot of the follow-up. So, you know, confirming failed test cases just to ensure that, you know, that bug is reproducible, and just kind of following up with our development team to ensure those fixes get fixed and back into the system and retested. So that's been fantastic. And they're also currently looking to build out a template for bulk import or export of procedures. And so this would most likely take the form of like an Excel spreadsheet that then can be uploaded to the site as a CSV file, and kind of similarly for downloads. And then additionally, they're working right now also to develop a template to support the process of collecting and prioritizing enhancement requests moving forward. Next slide, please. And then just a few other goals that we're working on this quarter. So last meeting, I had shared with you that we had developed kind of a general user agreement that users of the site agreed to, and just kind of outline terms and conditions basically for use of the site. And so over the past couple of months, those that user agreement has evolved actually into two separate documents. We have one that's just terms of service and another that's just defining the privacy policies. So we've been just working to update that and review that. And so it's almost finalized, and that's another item that I think we'll just need to get executive committee eyes on, just to make sure that we're on the right track there. Additionally, Elaine Kim in particular has been leading an effort to explore how CUS can be used to support the research of non-typical species. So these are species such as, you know, cephalopods, or a lot of kind of wildlife or other unique research models, and just figuring out how can we leverage this tool that we're developing to make information sharing easier for those research communities. So one of the features that we're starting to develop is creating a procedure type, which is just kind of a broad organizational category that we have within the system, such as, you know, survival surgery or euthanasia. And so we're creating a procedure type for special husbandry and veterinary medicine for these unique research species. And so that would allow, you know, users that do research with cephalopods, for example. I've been learning that, you know, the husbandry for those animals is so very unique to this particular type of squid or octopus that you happen to be using. And it's that community is really looking for a way to just easily share just, you know, husbandry practices and that sort of thing with one another. So we're working to develop that into the system as well. And then kind of as we're getting, we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel for development. One of our big goals this quarter is really just to come up with a more definitive timeline for completing that initial build, and then just kind of a rollout plan. So hopefully we can share that update with you at the next meeting. And so next slide, please. All right, and that's all I had. So thank you so very much. I'm happy to answer questions now or at the end. And if you'd like to help and get involved, we're always looking for volunteers. So just reach out to our general email address, which is just cusp@thefdp.org. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Aubrey, for that excellent update. What an impressive amount of work you all have managed to complete in what may feel to you like a long time, but is really not that much time at all for the amount of work that you've done. As we said before, if folks have any questions or comments, please feel free to pop those into the chat, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute you so that you can share your comment verbally. I do selfishly have a couple questions, maybe while folks think if they've got anything else. So about how many institutions are you thinking are going to participate in the pilot phase?
We're hoping to get 20 to 30, somewhere in that range. I think is kind of a nice, healthy number, but a manageable number. But I think we're open and we're flexible. We're kind of just looking to see what the interest level is, and
yeah,
but our target.
Are you still looking for volunteers to join you in that pilot phase?
Absolutely.
That's part of the volunteer population that you're looking for?
Yes.
What is the date or time frame that you're hoping for to get to that pilot phase, do you think?
We're hoping this fall.
Wow.
That, I mean, that I guess is my timeline. I still need to talk with my development team and just confirm that that's okay. I am often reminded that in system development and project management, there's that old adage for that you can have your project on time, on budget, and or in good quality, but you can only have 2 out of those 3. So pick your 2. So we'll see. I'm hopeful for the fall.
And we are kind of limited by our grant funding. So we've seen our choices. And then, so about how long do you think that pilot phase is going to last? You know, to give an idea on the time frame that the system might become available to other institutions.
That's a really good question. We haven't really discussed that in depth within the steering committee in terms of duration. But yeah, I'll have to think on that one and see.
Okay, so still kind of TBD for when you might exit the pilot phase and start making the site available a little bit more broadly, but targeting for that pilot to start in September. So after that, sometime after that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of one of the things that we're hoping to do for the pilot, just to kind of I guess act as a carrot for institutions, is to, we'll conduct the pilot basically in a test environment, but to kind of encourage folks to actually enter in real life data. We're going to see if it's possible then for us to kind of migrate then all of that data over into our live production site, kind of once the pilot is complete and we're like officially live, so that those institutions don't need to re-enter data or upload accounts again or anything like that. So it's almost kind of like a sneak peek early access sort of thing.
And one other quick question before we move on to Amanda Johnson's question that she posed in the chat. You mentioned, I think earlier in on your update that Cold Fusion was the old stack platform. Do you know the name of the new platform?
Oh, you're testing my memory. It's a PHP. I can look that one up and I can put it in the chat. I know we have that information, but like I said, I'm not a technical person by any stretch of the imagination. So I just know it was one of because I know the internal systems team within FDP had kind of are looking holistically at all of the tools that are being developed and what language they're currently developed in and kind of where are their common grounds. And it was one of those languages that was identified as most systems are being developed in this language. So let's move it over to that. I think it was a PHP or related language.
Awesome. Thank you. So then Amanda posted a question in the chat. Would a non-FDP member be allowed to participate in the pilot and or use of the CUSP site? And on use of the CUSP site, I know the answer is yes, right? The intention is to roll it out because it's part of the 21st Century Cures Act goals. We want to be making sure that we're making it broadly available. But I wonder if you've given thought to the pilot. Will that be closed just to FDP member institutions, or would you open it up broader than that?
We've never been asked that question. Our initial plans were just to limit it to FDP members and maybe even just working group members, just kind of depending on, I guess, interest really. So I think we'll have to give some thought to that. I don't know. But yeah, long term for sure, we definitely want to open the site up to both FDP member institutions and non-member institutions.
Great.
That's a great question.
Well, thank you so much for this update. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or hands raised. So
Thank you.
I know that you will stick with us though, right? So
Yes.
at the end of if folks think of other questions, please feel free to either save those until we get through some of the other updates or pop those in the chat. Thank you so much, Aubrey.
Thank you.
So next up, also related to some of the 21st Century Cures Act burden reducing efforts, I want to pass the microphone, I guess, the unmute button over to Bill Greer from the University of Michigan to give us an update on the Universal Protocol Template Project.
Yes, thank you very much, Melissa. And hello, colleagues. It's good for the opportunity to come here and chat with you. Again, my name is Bill Greer. I currently serve as an assistant VP for research at the University of Michigan. And I also oversee activities associated with the ICOOC Administrators Association. And I'll chat a little bit about that down the road. I only have a few slides. I'll move through them fairly quickly and save some time for questions after this session and also at the end. But I want to talk a little bit about how the pandemic impacted our ability to continue working on this, give you a summary of how we came up with UPT, Universal Protocol Template, why it may be needed, how it fits within the idea of the Cures Act and decreasing regulatory burden. Then I want to give you a status update and next steps and some timelines, and obviously some opportunities for Q&A. So jump into the next slide. One of the main things that kind of derailed us was the face-to-face opportunities for face-to-face meetings. Community input was compromised. And next slide, related to leadership survival. So I had a really significant impact to my personal life because of COVID. I was actually out of the office for about 7 months because of complications from COVID. So it really stopped my ability to do a lot of things, and this being one of them. So I'm now just getting back to the office, came back to Michigan on March 23rd, and just starting to get things renewed and up and running again. So I just wanted to let you guys know that, and I appreciate, for those of you that I already know, the warm and humbling please get better messages. So thank you very much. And with that, let me jump to the next slide and get us back on track. So let me give you some history with that. So on slide 6, you'll see how we came up with this idea of a universal protocol template. You'll see it goes way back to 2016, which is when this idea came from our ICOOC administrative community through the ICOOC Administrators Association and such meetings. That particular organization has a supportive contract through OLAW and working collaborations with the USDA and ALAC as well to hold meetings at least 3 times a year in support of ICOOC administrative needs, i.e., the compliance community and anyone else that's in animal programs that cares to participate and partake. So in 2016, it was brought to our attention we should consider the idea of developing a protocol form that would work for all institutions. We held meetings in 2017 and 2018 to further facilitate the idea. And then soon after that, we partnered with FDP and we established a working group. Dr. Ron Banks, who is my colleague for ICOOC Administrators Association, and myself, we kind of led the initiative and worked with FDP to get Dr. Axel Wolf from OLAW and Dr. Bob Gibbons from the USDA to also participate in our activities. The idea was then to develop and establish a document that would work for us as a community. So let me jump to the next slide and give you guys an idea of the objectives of the Universal Protocol Template and some of the things that we wanted to do. Again, in 2016, this idea first came up basically from a discussion that I had with Dr. Wolf on the current resource that's on OLAW's website, and the fact that as a community, we could take a look at it and see what updates could be made to make it a more regulatory reduced burden document, i.e. look at it and see what things are actually needed by IACUCs to do the things that they need to do to review their the protocols and proposed animal activities. As we thought through this, we wanted to really think about the audience that we're serving, and we did find that a lot of the tailoring of this document would be to mice and rats, simply because of a survey done by Neighbor that told us about 90% of the protocols that are submitted relate to mice and rats. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that this document can't be used for other species of vertebrates used in our field. What it means is that we could tailor some of the questions in the document to allow the check of a box communicating to IACUCs that, for example, mice will be euthanized using asphyxiation by an appropriate gas agent such as CO2, isoflurane, or others, and yes, a secondary method will be employed. So what it does is it creates an opportunity for the PI community just to agree to something that we know is a standard practice or a standard process that most of us use across our institutions. We are working with Aubrey and CUSP to get some of the common procedures rolled into the template, or simply take some of the verbiage from a CUSP procedure and build it into a specific question. One of the things we're trying to do with this template for this document is to only include information in the document that's needed by the IACUC to review and approve an animal activity. And in that, we would ask for specific information, again, that may be just a checkbox. You know, how you're going to do surgery in rodents, what's the typical prep, you know, from, you know, shaving down a mouse to using a betadine or some other form of cleansing agent to prep and things like that. So we are and did look at procedures and processes that are pretty common across our community, and things we can build directly into the document just to make it easier to use from a PI perspective, a compliance team perspective, and yes, from an IACUC perspective when the review occurs. We do have a document finished. Where we are right now is have it in the hands of the working group. The working group has spent a lot of time reviewing it and sending both Ron and I and others their comments electronically. And where we paused was our face-to-face meetings that are now Zoom meetings, actually looking at and discussing some of the comments and suggestions that have been made by the community. Ideally, we want to keep this as user-friendly as possible, and we want to make it work for everybody and anybody. It's not been sent to any IT folks. It's not there for a solution or consideration for a solution yet. I've been getting a lot of questions from them. And those of you that are in that sector, you know, we're going to be happy to share this with you collectively when it's done. But as of right now, we're just ready to not share these ideas until we've talked through them. Let me get to the next slide. And what you'll see, and this is a disclaimer because we don't want to give you or the community an idea that once this document is done, you're required to use it. Yes, we have OLAW. Yes, we have the USDA and others involved. Reason being, we want to make sure the things that we're building into this document do meet the regulatory requirements. But again, the choice to use this document either as a resource or something as a permanent document at your institution is entirely up to you. You may decide that you'll look through this and use a third of it, a half of it, or none of it at all. That's your call, and it's, again, entirely up to you. We're just trying to create a resource to give our community an idea of the things that we can do from a relieving regulatory burden standpoint, and the things that we can do to make things a lot easier for PIs to check a box, how to euthanize a mouse with CO2 asphyxiation, and the IACUC knowing that if that box is checked, that it is something that's been vetted and something that they're more than happy approving. So again, we're on track to do the things we need to do. I'll jump to the last slide before questions. This is our hopes. Again, I want to get the working group engaged again. The document is finished. I have the working group's ideas, at least electronic ideas, built into it. I want to get comments rolling again. I hope to get it through our working group discussions by the end of October. And then we want to do some user testing. We do have representation on the user group from various sectors, IACUC members, IACUC chairs, people in compliance roles, veterinarians and others that can give their perspective from their position's point of view. But again, once we've finished it, then I want to specifically have IACUC members look at it from a reviewer standpoint, make sure it satisfies their needs. Veterinarians look at it from a veterinary standpoint, make sure it meets their needs. Compliance groups and other parties involved, with the ultimate goal of having a document that is refined with all the input from our working group, our tester group, and then finally have this thing ready to go 1st of January. I'm hoping if we can get through these steps and we work efficiently and expeditiously, that we will able to provide this group to OLAW through Axel, and it will eventually replace the current document that's on OLAW's website as a resource. Once we all have vetted it, the community has vetted it, and we know that it is truly helping us to facilitate the cure's objectives, and we know that it meets the needs of our institutions and our community. So with that, I'll jump to questions, and then Melissa, happy to turn it over to the next speaker if we have no questions.
Thanks so much, Bill, for that great update. I'm so glad you're feeling healthy again and ready to go to pick this work back up. It sounds like it's going to be something that's going to be a great resource for our community.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So Bill, I'm not seeing questions in the chat right now, but we'll have another opportunity. So if folks do have other questions, hopefully you'll stick with us as we get to the end if folks are processing. I wanted to turn really quickly to Amanda Humphrey, if you're able to unmute and just share with us a quick update. We don't have a slide on this, but on the collaborative effort with the subawards group on the IACUC sample MOU and guidance.
Yes, I'm very excited to say that we just this week got executive committee approval, and we will be looking to post the IACUC MOU sample and the guidance document within the next week or two. So I just have to do a couple pieces of cleanup on the documents and print them to PDF and get them finalized, and then they will be ready to post on our websites. And we will send out notifications to both the IACUC listserv as well as the subaward listserv.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. All of this great work. Animal subjects research is going to be a breeze moving forward. So really quick before we move on, Bill, I see that there is one question in the chat for you if you want to pop back on and address it now. I think it's asking a little bit more about which communities will be engaged to solicit feedback on the UPT. There's Robert Noble's expressed an interest in having his IACUC and animal welfare team review. Would you imagine that you'd be sharing it with some of the FDP listservs for feedback as well as other community partners?
Yeah, happy to. So we're looking for tester groups So if you're interested in being part of the testing group, send us a note and I'll note it down. I think we're too far into the working group to add more folks to the working group. So my goal is going to be to stick with the current working group that we have to do some refinements and get the document ready for user testing. But yes, we are more than happy to have volunteers for user testing. So please reach out to me and I will sign you up. If you want your IACUC to look at it and or members of your veterinary team to look at it. Again, we're going to be very specific with the user testing when we give it to IACUC members. We want them to evaluate it from an IACUC member standpoint. When we give it to compliance groups for testing, we want them to look at it from an IACUC compliance group standpoint, and same for veterinarians. So let me know if you're willing to partake. I will put you on the list and look for a note sometime in the fall, and we will start sending it out to those that are willing to partake as user testing or in the user testing.
Great. Bill, I'm not sure I saw it in the slides. Would you mind popping in the chat your email address if folks are interested in reaching out to you on volunteering for the user testing?
Will do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. A little bit of a diversion. I accidentally just muted myself. A little bit of a diversion away from this excellent work in the animal subject space. Talking about just a couple other research compliance committee updates. Doug Backman, if you're here, do you want to share a little bit on the news? We'd shared an update on the FDP May listserv about the rebranding of the Export Control Subcommittee.
Sure, no, absolutely, thank you. So the former Export Control Subcommittee has been rebranded to the Research Security Subcommittee, consistent with recent changes in the regulatory landscape. Many export control offices and staff at our institutions are expanding their roles beyond traditional export compliance, and that's going to include research security more broadly. And this rebranding recognizes the shift in our community. I think that I'm really excited about the security landscape as it would apply to topics such as technology and data security, export control, foreign influence, conflict of interest as it relates to foreign influence, controlled unclassified information, and NIST and IT environments as it relates to research security, even classified contracts. We probably want to take a look at those topics as well. And as everybody knows, that information is related in the pre and post award. So many things to talk about. So next slide. So this is my name, and I am the co-chair, and we're looking for other people to be a co-chair. There's information on the FDP May listserv about it. There's application materials that need to be due by May 20th. And Melissa, I'll let you go into further detail on that. But if you are interested, please take a look and let us know. I'll hand it back to you, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Doug. Yeah, I guess just another couple comments on the co-chair call. There's a lot of really, potentially great work to be done in this space. So we're looking for someone to join Doug in getting this going, this broader work going. Really open to a wide variety of different skill sets. I think the research security space is pretty broad, just looking for someone with, perhaps some experience volunteering, leading these types of volunteer efforts, and happy to discuss with anyone who's interested in learning more about the requirements. Just also generally a plug for listservs. So if you're interested in this new subcommittee and its activities, but you're not really in a position to sign up to be a co-chair, please join the newly created research security listserv, and we'll use that to make sure that we're keeping in touch with the community on those projects and volunteer opportunities as they come along. And just generally, somewhat new, some of our subcommittees have had listservs for a while, and some have just been created, but really trying to make sure that we're leveraging that option to be keeping in touch with interested volunteers and generally building community among FDP member institutions. And so I just want to strongly encourage anyone who's interested in either the animal subjects work that you've heard about today, the research security work, or any of the other research compliance subcommittees, which are human subjects, conflict of interest, data stewardship, or just generally the research compliance community at FDP to go ahead and sign up for those listservs. Either following the link that's on this slide, or mailing lists is one of the options at the very top of the main FDP landing page. And once you sign up, I encourage you to also post. This is a great community to be able to share challenges, feedback, interesting news, just a really great opportunity to learn from and share with our colleagues. So I don't know if anyone has had, thought of any additional questions or thoughts, or you have suggestions for things you'd love to see the Research Compliance Committee or one of its subcommittees take on in the year ahead. But I'll just open up the floor for any other comments, questions, thoughts. Either pop it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can have you unmuted. While everyone is thinking about whether or not you do have something else to ask, I'll just make a note that Sarah has posted in the chat the post-session thought exchange that we're hoping everyone will participate in. Helping OLA and Usda APHIS receive feedback on how this session did in terms of our interpretation or our understanding of their efforts to reduce burden, as well as areas where we think that there is still potential. So seeing no raised hands or other comments in the chat, I have posted up there my email address. If you think of anything after the session, or you think of suggestions for demonstrations or projects that our committee could take on, please feel free to reach out. And I posted a link to our website, though please do note that we're in the process of making some necessary updates. And I hope that everyone will join us for our next session at 1 o'clock to discuss NSPM 33 implementation guidance and accompanying topics. Sarah, is there anything else that we should mention before we let folks have a few minutes back in their day?
The only thing I want to mention is that we do have our next session on NSPM 33. It's at 1 p.m. today. So if you're interested, please follow your confirmation email and register for that session.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. Bye.